All right, some of the slides I didn't go over. So in case you don't know what red, green, and blue look like, there we go. 8087, 100. Well, this would have been 100, 130, but now it's possibly G100. I don't know. 100 low lead. 100 low lead is if you've never seen it, it's absolutely beautiful. If you see, it just looks like something you want to dive on into, but no, I don't recommend that.
The pool at the Hearst Castle, right?
There we go. So this is the
Great example.
So let me see, 50-50 mixture of G100 UL. There's your 100 low lead. There's your G100 UL. There's like a mixture of the two. So. Yeah.
I feel like we're taking an art class right now.
No, I wouldn't be for me. I don't like art. I don't know. Here's just some gigantic mason jars of gas. I thought, how cool is that? I don't know. All right.
Big shield right there.
All right. Talk about rich and lean mixtures, and in the middle. So a rich mixture. Rich mixture, as little as 8 parts air to 1 part fuel by weight can burn. Okay, that's about as rich as we can get. That is 8 to 1. 8 parts what? Air and 1 part fuel. Also known as 0.125 for looking at a ratio. Let's see, can burn. What was that? 2. Point number 3. A rich mixture burns slower. Than best power mixture. Which now we have to think about the fact that not only are we talking about ratios, and we've come off of best power, and now we added a bunch of fuel, but when we did that, it changes how long it takes the fuel to burn. So keep that in mind. Fuel now has a timing to it. So we talk about our timing of our engines, where we want our ignition to happen at, say, 25 degrees before top dead center. Well, it's all in theory. You have the spark hits. The fuel is going to take X number of seconds, not seconds, but fractions of a second to burn. That's calculated out. It's where you want the peak pressure point of the piston, the burn, to push on the piston. It's all timed out. But now you start changing the ratio, and it starts changing the timing of everything. Right? In our aircraft engines, they don't change. They're just stuck. They're stuck at exactly where you put the magneto, and that's it. In a car, it can do all this, but it doesn't in an airplane. So you have to think about that as you're doing stuff. All right, lean mixture. As much as 18 parts air to 1 part fuel by weight. Now, I know this 18, some books have it different. I think some books have 16. I like to stick with the 18 because it makes it easy to remember. There's an 8 over there and an 8 down here. So it's 8 and 8. I think it makes it way easier, so I go with the one that it's easier. So that's 18 to 1. 18 parts what? Air. That's a good thing. It's 0.055. All right. So lean mixtures burn very slow. And there's a Q&A that has to do in this, so I think it's stupid, so I brought it up. There's a Q&A question that says, excessively lean mixtures can... wait a minute. I don't have the question. I just think I have the answer. There's something about, I wish I wrote the question. Has something to do with which mixture can cause a backfire?
Be a rich mixture.
No, that's after fire. So backfire goes to the carburetor, and it backfire goes to the carburetor. After fire goes out the exhaust. And I'm pretty sure the question asked which one of the mixtures can potentially lead to a backfire, and the answer is a lean mixture, with the theory being that, according to the Q&A, that the lean mixture burns so slow that it's still burning when the intake valve opens. But I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, excessively lean mixtures can burn so slow that the fuel is still burning when the intake valve opens. This causes fuel air mixture to burn and causes backfire. I wrote not likely, but known to happen. Oh, no. Oh, I know. On my new notes, I didn't bring that. That's just not it. So if you think about it, what comes after intake? Compression. Well, okay, compression. Then we've got ignition, power, where it's burning, exhaust coming up. Intake, it's not still burning at that point.
Burning all the way through the
Exhaust,
stroke,
yeah.
And still burning. And
Yeah. No,
Wow,
that's,
You must be leaning it to like 2 to 1.
it wouldn't burn because it, you know,
Yeah.
no, that'd be rich, by the way.
200.
When the numbers get closer together, it's rich. 2 to 1
you're
is very
right,
rich.
So it'd be 20 to 1.
Yeah.
100 to 1.
Yeah,
Whoever
something.
said that was right the first time.
Yeah, it's not. It has nothing to do with that. It has more to do with. Let me think. It gets because it will if you get really lean. It's not because it's still burning. It's that. It has to do with the pressures involved in the intake manifold are enough that it can actually pull in some of the air. I'll have to think it through, but I know this one.
Or timing too, right?
No, it does have to do with the lean mixture. It's right there in the tip of my tongue. I'll think about it. Maybe I wrote it down somewhere. I know I did because I know it in my head. Let me see. It's burning. It just has something to do with the hot air in the intake system is so hot that it sets it off through the carburetor is what it has to do with. So, but yeah, it's not still burning. Don't buy that. Okay, burn speeds. So we're going to talk about burn speeds. And why this is important. Let me see. Maybe this slide. Flame propagation rate. Yes, this will be it. All right. Burn speeds shows that both rich and lean burn. Okay, so right here is my best power mixture. And remember, I don't want to call this stoichiometric. I mean, if it helps you to think about it that way, fine, go ahead. I don't have a problem with it. But best power is the equivalent of stoichiometric, but corrected for the cylinder operation. How's that sound? All right. But that's going to give us the absolute most power. You have the correct amount of fuel, the correct amount of air, everything burns. It burns at the right speed. It burns fastest. It gives us the best power. So here we have best power right here. All right. And so from there, if we lean it out, this is the rates. That's going to be speed. This is high speed. This is low speed. So which one burns the slowest? Lean, which is what I wrote in the notes. So right there is kind of where we're at there. So rich is going to die out right here. It gets to this point, and then what is it? It just dies, right? Because we have too much fuel, not enough air, so it dies out. And this is going to be a ratio of what?
18.
Okay, remember rich. So what is super rich? 1 to 1 is super rich, right? Okay, so that's how I remember it. 1 to 1. Oh, that'd be so rich it wouldn't work. 1 to 1. When the numbers get closer together, that's rich. When they get further apart, that's lean. So lean is the right here, and it died out. What was that ratio?
18 to 1.
18 to 1. Okay, so lean can burn a lot slower. Okay, that's the point right there that I wanted to make with this slide. So, but we take best power and we go a little bit rich or a little bit lean. It's all the same, right? A little bit leaner, a little bit richer. So for a long time, it's really kind of same. It doesn't really matter till you get on these extreme ends where it really starts to fall off. But a little bit richer, a little bit leaner, it's all about the same. And normally we're running right about in this area here anyway. Okay? And we'll get into why that's a little bit. So let's see, both rich and lean burn slower than best power, but lean mixture has the ability to burn the slowest. And I think I already wrote that for you, right? Lean burns the slowest. So I'll just write that. Lean burns the slowest. Slowest.
That just kind of hurts my head thinking about it. So I feel like it would be like in such an oxygen-rich environment that it would just burn up so violently, so quickly.
It does it, and you have to think about it differently. That it's this expanding flame front.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, because like everything is super far apart. Like I mean, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if
Yeah.
it's super far apart, that it like takes time for the.
Yeah,
flame to
that
propagate.
hurts my head a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
It's not,
Let's take an Advil.
it's not like the engine is powered by explosions, it's like expanding gas.
So a little lean and a little rich burn at about the same speed.
So how do you know where you're at?
Doesn't matter. Oh, I'll show you how you know. But max lean, which is what ratio?
18 to 1.
18 to 1, burns much slower than max rich, which is what? 8 to 1. All right.
Is that when you start getting into those conversations of like the little lean and the little rich, and people are like, oh, I like the rich?
Yeah, well, I'm headed there right now. So burn speed is important. Due to where the peak pressure point happens, where the peak pressure point or the PPP happens.
Peak pressure point, you said?
Peak pressure point. I tried to make a point. Peak pressure point. So if you think about that piston coming up on compression and it sparks right before it gets to top dead center, we don't want an explosion to happen right there, right? Because what does it do? It tries to hammer everything backwards. That's not good. So it's coming up. We light the fuel on fire, and everything takes way longer than we think about it, right? And the fuel starts to burn, but now this piston's already come up to top dead center. And now it's going to start its way down. The fuel is now burned. It's going to get to its peak pressure point just after top dead center. So it pushes the piston down, not backwards, but down. So let's see, PPP should happen. Should happen after top dead center.
Is it like a specific degree now?
I don't think I have it on this particular one, but just after top dead center. The further down the piston is, the more power you're going to lose. So just after should happen. Actually, just after. We'll put just after top dead center. All right. So you have your peak pressure point of the fuel happening when the piston's at the top. You don't have a lot of space up there, so that's a lot of pressure. So how could we relieve some of the pressure? Oh, and by the way, if you have a lot of pressure, what are you prone to having? Detonation. And that's the big thing, detonation. We do not want detonation, right? That'll destroy an engine in seconds, literally seconds. Not like 45 or 90, like 5, 10. You can melt out a piston, which is not what you want to happen if you're over the mountains at night. So, but two, so now think about it, at high power settings, well, I should back up just a little bit. we also have to think about the pressure in the cylinder is variable depending upon what you've done with the throttle valve. So if I'm at idle and I have the throttle valve closed and the engine's trying to suck in air, but it's just having a hard time because I've got these little tiny cracks where hardly any air can get through the carburetor, then what is the pressure in the cylinders? It's really low, right? And we talk about that as manifold pressure. So if you have a constant speed prop, you look at the manifold pressure gauge and it's going to be really, really low. It's a vacuum. It's a suction happening right in the manifold, right? But then I go wide open throttle and that butterfly valve in the carburetor or fuel injection unit, whatever, opens all the way up. And now the manifold pressure, that's the pressure just after the throttle valve, is going to go to almost atmospheric on the ground. So if we're at 29.92, call it 30, I'm only going to lose about an inch, so I'm at 29 inches. Okay, well, that pressure in the manifold transfers to all the pressure in the cylinders, and so now the cylinders have a lot more pressure at wide open throttle. So can you see how at idle or 65% cruise power, how the pressure in the cylinders, just by the nature of where the throttle valve is, isn't that great, relatively speaking. Follow? But when I go wide open throttle, what happens to the pressure in the cylinders? It goes way up. Add a turbocharger to it. Okay? So now you're getting you add another inch to it at least. So that's where detonation happens because all the pressure in the cylinders gets so high. So what can you do about that? Well, you can add more fuel. What happens if I add more fuel? Becomes rich. What happens if we get rich? Slow burn, which means peak pressure point happens later. So you have a margin of safety against detonation. So at high power settings, a rich mixture will move the peak pressure point later. I'll say later. So a little further after opt-out setting.
A rich mixture will cause the later peak pressure point, and so will a lean mixture.
Yes.
So both of them, because they have a slower burn,
Yes.
create the pressure point. Then is later. It's like you're saying that like if it takes X number of seconds.
Yeah.
To burn, then somewhere is the peak pressure point. But if you extend it, then it's going to be
Yes.
longer. Okay.
Yes.
So detonation could happen if you're running too lean or too rich.
Okay, but what nobody talks about, which kind of bugs me in any of the manuals, is that remember the 100/130?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So it's
I
like
see what you mean.
So a rich mixture brings the octane rating of our fuel up to 130, but if I lean it out, I go to 100. So if I run it on the rich side during high power settings,
Better.
then one, I've moved the peak pressure point later. Remember, it's all about detonation right now. I moved it a little bit later. Detonation and temperature, I should say. Moved it a little bit later. I've increased my octane rating from the 100 to the 130. So on high power settings, rich is very good. Lean is very bad. And nobody will argue that.
obviously.
Huh? What's
So
that?
how does it?
I mean, they can, but they'd be wrong.
I guess it's just kind
What's that?
Running lean's fine. I just got a new aircraft after.
Yeah. Because you do not want detonation. That's where it all happens. So,
So you're more. Is there any?
okay. We'll see if this helps. Oops, this is like 4. Had a personal one?
No.
I kind of wonder, so you say that you lean it out quite heavily when you're up at altitude.
Mhm.
What's then causing, what's not allowing you to have detonation?
Well, we're getting there. Where the peak pressure point happens will have an effect on cylinder pressure. Obviously, that's what we've been talking about. Detonation, which we talked about. And temperature, which is a big thing. So if you don't know anything else about running your engine, you're a pilot, you're going to be watching at least your temperature. And when that temperature starts to run away and starts melting cylinders, and that's really bad. So it's surprising that, and we talked about this, I think, last class. I'm going to talk about it here in just a second. But the temperatures on cylinders, to me, 400 is a red line. you don't go above 400. But my POH says I can go to 435. I'm not doing that. When I hit 400, I mean, it's an emergency for me. I'm pulling power. I'm lowering the nose. I'm making sure cowl flaps are open. I'm doing something weird at 400. The 172S model, which I think has the light combing, they should go to 500 degrees.
Oh, hell.
No, and if you read the metallurgy on these cylinders, it's something to force something to metal. It changes characteristics big time. So, all right, did that help at all?
Well, that, no, I was,
Okay, so all of this right here, why did we talk about this? Because we're going to talk so much about lean and lean and rich. Why lean? Why rich? And you have to know this stuff if you're going to be around these engines at all, because not knowing it just kind of leaves you as like, yeah, I don't know, because it doesn't work that way. You won't be a very good mechanic. So you have to know all this. So it's like, well, why is rich good? Why are we enriching cylinders? Why is the fuel? Why is the carburetor designed to run richer here? Why is it designed to run leaner here? Why is it designed to run rich there? Because what we're going to get to at a certain point is you're going to look at a carburetor, and if I do a graph here, we'll say rich, lean, idle, and wide open throttle, wide open throttle. It's going to look something like this. The curve. Carburetor is designed to do that. It's designed to run pretty rich at idle, around 65% power, where we're going to cruise. It's lean, and then we get to wide open throttle. It draws a ton of fuel. So my particular aircraft, right in this area right here, I burn. What do I burn? Like 18 gallons per hour. I don't know why you did that. I burn about 18 gallons per hour at this setting up here. And right in here, I burn about 10 to 12. So that's a big difference. That's a lot of gallons in 1 hour, if you ask me. Coming through a little tiny orifice. All right, so that's where we're going with all this. We have to understand that. And so hopefully understand that right here, running rich, if nothing else, running rich is going to move that peak pressure point closer to top dead center or away from top dead center? Away from it, where the piston's starting to come down a little bit more. Okay, and that's going to help the engine run, cylinders run a little cooler. It's going to prevent detonation.
oh, that's why it cools.
Yeah,
Because I always talk about
fuel's cooling. Yeah, that and just running fuels like liquid.
More
So
and more liquid.
okay, so let's talk about these temps, because that's what it's all about. I mean, it's one thing just to strap on a carburetor and go, it runs, go for it. It's another to have an engine that's going to live through it. So cylinder head temps. Did we talk about this already? Probably a week. Cylinder head temperature, or CHT, cylinder head temperature. That's what you're just going to call it, CHT. So, unlike cars, because you don't care, unlike cars, aircraft need the CHT managed and monitored. Closely. My wife often says, she goes, I don't like flying with you. You always fidget with stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'm actually working this engine. You can't just, turn it on and forget about it. I mean, you're always looking at something. It's like, I'm watching my CHT. I'm watching my oil temps. I'm watching my oil pressure. I don't like what I see. I'm going to open up my cowl flaps. If it's running a little bit hot, open the cowl flaps. Running too cold, I got to close the cowl flaps. If I got the cowl flaps open, it's still running hot, I got to lower the nose. If it's still too hot, I got to pull back the power. Thankfully, my airplane I don't have that problem, but in the 150, it's like, it always felt like I was watching the oil temp. All right, let's see. This is what I say. So this is me. This is, I don't know. As Peggy Hill would say, this is my opinion, and everybody agrees with me. CHTs should be kept to 400 degrees F or less. I run my engine around 360 to 380 degrees on my hotter cylinders. Let's see. So I had the Cessna 182Q POH, has it at 435 max. And the Cessna 172 Sierra POH, which has the Lycoming engine, has 500 degrees max, which is just insane to me. And there's not much more you can say about CHTs. I mean, you got to keep them to less than 400. How do we keep them less? Well, airflow and fuel flow. So dumping fuel in it will cool them. Why does it cool it? Well, one, we know it's going to move that peak pressure point later. So I guess as the fuel pressure point is later, it's later in the cycle. It's not that much time until the exhaust valve is going to open. You're going to get the exhaust out of there. I'm just making up crap as I go right now. The other thing is, they say that just dumping liquid into it is going to cool a cylinder. We're going to talk about at some point in this class about water injection. So injecting water into cylinders gives you a lot of power. It also cools the cylinder. So, what's that?
Water meth?
Water meth?
Water methanol?
Well, water injection. No, you don't need methanol. Just water. Water with a little bit of alcohol I know. All right. Okay, so we got that where we are so far. Everybody's with me. Okay. So again, cylinder head temp, there's not a lot, right? I'm flying along and my cylinder head temps are getting high. There's really only a few things I can do. I have cowl flaps I can open. A lot of, 172s, 150s, they don't. A lot of planes don't. So all you can do is just pull back power and lower the nose. That's all you have left, okay? My airplane, I can open cowl flaps, pull back power, lower the nose. That's about it. Can't think of anything else, okay? But where we start getting into engine management is where we start getting into exhaust gas temperature. And this is where things can get either confusing or like, oh, wow, that's cool. Exhaust gas temps, or EGT, exhaust gas temperature. So the exhaust gas is taken, temperature is taken about, taken 2 to 4 inches after the cylinder. So you go 2 to 4 inches into your exhaust, drill a hole, stick a probe in. That's where you're going to get your exhaust gas temperature. The actual number is irrelevant. So in other words, I have an absolute. The POH says, oh, you can't go above 435 or 500, and I say 400. Well, what about exhaust gas temp? Doesn't mean anything. The only time it means anything is if you have TIT, you have a turbocharged aircraft. Then you're going to have a red line. But otherwise, exhaust gas temperature is just not, whatever it is, isn't relevant. And to that point, when they first came out with EGT gauges, this is what it looked like right here. Notice the numbers?
Yeah.
Because it didn't matter. So if you have this style of EGT gauge, there's a little screw right there. Let's see how large it is. This right here moves the yellow line. This one in here moves the white line. So it comes with a little screwdriver, sticks that hole. So mine went out in my airplane. I used to have this style. I had to put a new one in and calibrate it. So I go up. I went about 5,000 feet. And I leaned the engine. And I messed with this little screw until I could get my EGT as hot as possible. And I put it right there on this little asterisk. So I'm flying, I flew it, and I pull back on my mixture, and the EGT is going to get hotter and hotter and hotter. And I keep pulling it back, and it starts going cooler and cooler and cooler. right? So there's a fine line right in there where the exhaust gas temperature peaks out, then it goes the other way. Everybody follow? So I find that where it peaked out, and let's say it peaked out right here. Okay, so I get it right back there on the peak. Then I would put the screwdriver in the little hole and turn it until the needle just went to that spot right there. All done. And then take the screwdriver and you put this one right here. And each one of these is 25 degrees. Put the little thing right there, 25 degrees away from the peak as a reference line for you, and it's calibrated. So how much temperature was it right here? Who knows? Who cares? Yeah.
So if it's kind of who cares, then why even have the gauge? Like, why does it matter at all?
Oh, that's such a good question, because that is how we manage our leaning procedures and how much we lean the engine.
Okay.
See, without it, you would be left to a system that is almost perfect, but we wouldn't know that. So I shall explain. So let me see. Yeah, but just so you know, typically, EGT is somewhere between 1200 to 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. And it really depends on where the probe is. The further down the pipe it is, the cooler it's going to be. Closer to the cylinder, the higher it's going to be.
So do they all need to be, if one's 2.5 inches, then they all need to be 2 inches?
Yes, you never want them moved. If you're going to put in a system, they've all got to be the same. Otherwise, you're reading irrelevant information. All right, so why would we even take the time to put in an EGT gauge? And, why then did we go from the single one, like my aircraft came with from the factory on one cylinder, actually number 3, to, spending the kind of money that we now spend to put in a digital engine analyzer that has, this one you can't really tell, but it is. It's got, down the bottom is CHT, and wherever that little break in the line is, you see the line break? That's the cylinder head temp. And this is the exhaust gas temp up here. I like mine better. I don't think
that's
I.
a bad design.
Well, that's the original design. I mean, that's what we had to work with.
Yeah. Sorry, you had both ways.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me see. What's next? Maybe I put. Oh, there we go. I was going to look for it. There we go. There's the one I have my airplane. All right. So now it's split out like that. Okay. So, why do we do this? All right. So it all comes down to, rich is good. It's good for when we're high power settings. We want it rich. We don't have detonation. We know that's going to keep the cylinders cool. But if we get up to altitude, and we pull the power back. So this person happens to be running at 79% horsepower right here. But we're going to cruise right about 65% power. And now you want to lean out the engine. Well, for the longest time, people would say, why would you lean out your engine? Fuel is cheaper than an engine. Just burn the fuel. So rule number 1, don't ever lean below 5,000 feet. Don't write this down. So rule number 1 was below 5,000 feet, never lean. Rule number 2, when you get to 5,000 feet, consider not leaning, right? Because fuel is cheaper than a new engine. And then if you are going to lean, make sure you don't go to the peak. And I'll explain that. Always run at about 50 degrees rich of peak. So the new way of thinking is lead is in the fuel and lead is very bad. And if we could put less lead in the engine, that is very good. So an engine that has been flown by somebody who is, I don't want to say aggressive, but diligent in leaning, will have less lead deposits on the valves, less likely to have a valve stick, less contamination of your oil. You will burn less gas, and you can go faster and further. So to me, there's no real drawback. So what happens when you go up? So as you start climbing, now when I'm climbing, I leave my throttle now all the way wide open. I used to pull back on my my green line is, well, I have a red line at 2400. So my red line is 2400. So my gauge looks a little different. But I would always pull back right after taking off and clearing, 500 feet or 1,000. I'd pull back my power and kind of, ease up on that manifold pressure, which is down here. Sorry, mine are backwards. My manifold's here. I think my RPM is here. Anyway, so I'd pull back on my manifold, be easy on my engine. And then I got to thinking about it. I know how my carburetor is designed. It de-richens it and causes it to go leaner at that point. I need it rich on my climb. So I don't do that anymore. I just leave the throttle wide open and climb through that. So, but I do get a lot of fuel in there, and I see it right down here on my gallons per hour fuel flow. This is 11.1 gallons per hour. I see that on mine. And I also have one that says miles per gallon that flashes at me, and it's like 8. Ooh, that's not good. I was 5 point something the other day. Anyway, okay, so we get up, get to cruise altitude. I'm going to pull back the black knob, which is my manifold pressure. I'm going to pull back my prop, and so again, I have a different engine, so my red line is 2400. I'm going to pull it back to about 21 inches. Oops, it's backwards.
So you're going up.
I'm at altitude, right? So let's just say I went to 5,000. Doesn't matter. I'll lean mine out at 2,000. If I level off at 2,000, I'm leaning in a minute. I lean everywhere. All right, so I level off at some altitude. I pull back the manifold. I pull back on the prop. So I'm going to run mine about, it depends on the altitude I'm at. I have a little chart that I read depending on what altitude you're at. If I'm, way up in altitude, it's going to be a little bit higher RPM and my manifold wide open. All right. So anyway, so I set the engine where I want it for these settings, and now I'm going to reach over to the red knob, and I'm going to start leaning out my engine. And when I level off and I'm full rich, I'm going to look at these EGT graph right here, and I'm going to notice that all of mine are pretty low. About 1,200, 1,100, 50, 1,200, they're all low. And as I grab the knob and I start pulling it back, I will watch them start to climb. Climb, 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 climb. Right? I'm actually extracting more heat energy out of the engine. Someone said, oh, consider your exhaust gas temperature, how much waste is going out the exhaust. I don't like to think about that because maybe I am wasting more out of the exhaust, but I'm extracting more work out of the fuel too. And so I can actually start to watch my airspeed start to climb because it was too rich, right? I'm closer to that, I don't want to say 8-to-1, it's not that rich, but 10 or 12 maybe. So it's too rich. So I'm going to start leaning it. What happens again? EGT starts climbing, climbing, climbing. My manifold won't change because it doesn't change. My RPM won't change because the prop has got it locked to it. But the prop starts taking a bigger bite because it's getting more power, and I start watching my airspeed start to climb. Okay? And my gallons per hour starts going down. So I'm going to keep going to a point where it's going to be one of these two in the middle on my engine because 182s are notorious for having the worst distribution of fuel of any aircraft out there. Just the way they're designed is horrible. So mine aren't even, but I'll watch the two middle ones come up to the peak and start to go back the other way. And then in a second, it'll start running rough. So I go back up to where that peak was. I'll push it back in that peak just where it's stopped running rough. By the way, that's exactly how the POH says to lean your engine because it didn't have one of these when it came out of the factory. It says pull it until the engine runs rough and push it back in until it stops. Stop. So I run my engine. I have two cylinders, I think, that are running at what we call peak EGT. All right, so if this was a fuel-injected engine that had nice gammy injectors, they would all be even. So you can watch all of your EGTs come up somewhat together. They'll peak, and then if I keep leaning, they start going back the other way. So now you need to know this. So if I bring it up to peak, that's called peak EGT. Okay? If I bring it up to peak and I lean it more and it starts going down, that's called lean of peak. All right? That's really important. And this is all in reference to EGT. Remember, we're talking now 100% within context of exhaust gas temperatures. Because there's other times where I might talk about, oh, that's rich of peak RPM. That's something totally different. That's only in idle setups. So right now we're talking strictly about exhaust gas temperature. All right, so the old school method of leaning was find your peak, pull back the mixture, pull back, find peak, right there's peak, push it back in until it cooled about 50 degrees. That would be called 50 degrees rich of peak. Pushed it back in, 50 degrees rich of
When they
peak.
say 50 degrees, they mean temperature, not degrees on a.
Correct. It's literally right here. You can see right there, the readout says, this particular cylinder right here, number 3 is 1540.
Right.
So if that's the peak, and I'm doing the older school leaning, which I don't do, and I wanted to go 50 degrees rich of peak, then I would push the knob in until I got to 1490. Right? Cool it by 50 degrees.
Yep.
So running at lean at peak and rich at peak will cool it?
Yes. Yep. Peak is peak. And on both sides of that, you have less. So you can only get it to go up so high. Yeah.
There's 1 through 6 on the EGT. What is T?
That might be the turbo.
So when you're climbing, you're running rich.
Yes.
And then so
High power settings. Wide open throttle. 100%
wide
power.
throttle, full rich, and then you level off, and now what you're doing is you're leaning, and then so then that's why you can't go to over lean. You want your temperature, your CHTs, your EGTs go down because you're not. I can't explain it. I can't explain it. My brain's not.
I'm going to cover this like a few times. If you have a fuel injected engine that is balanced well, and I keep talking about GAMI. So these engines, especially Continental, when they came out of the factory, they just have 6 injectors that are all the same. It's like, oh, give me 6 of those. Well, GAMI, I forget what they stand for, but they're the ones that make the GU 100UL. They're a pretty interesting company. They came up with a system a long time ago saying, well, wait a minute, these aren't matched. The airflow isn't matched to all 6 cylinders because of the way this engine's designed. Why don't we match the nozzles to the fuel flow? So you buy GAMI injectors by your engine, and they're matched to the cylinder. In fact, you can tell they come with a little placard that goes on each one of the valve rocker covers that has the serial number in which nozzle goes into each spot. They're not interchangeable. I mean, 2 of them are usually interchangeable, like these two match, these two match, these two, but not always. And so when you got that, then you had very even. I mean, this is like, I would never see this in my airplane with 6 green bars at the same and, 5 blue bars at the same practically. Now mine are kind of off by 2 or 3. Yeah.
I'm assuming you need an STC to run that.
Yeah, it'd be an STC.
You need to get a rough price point for what that would cost you to do that.
I don't think it's much. Everybody does it. Everybody with fuel injected engines buys these things.
Okay,
It's like,
so
it's so common.
so,
But I have a carbureted engine. All right, so you have this fuel injected engine, especially with GAMIs, it's well matched. Okay, now you're allowed to do stuff that carbureted guys in 182 can't do. And they get into, and I don't mean just Continentals, but in fuel injected engines in general, you start to have more choices where you can run lean of peak. You can actually go to peak EGT and keep pulling that thing back. All right, we're going to talk about what that means, but you can do that. Well, for so long, everybody said, you do that, you're just going to burn up your valve. You might as well just order new valves while you're in the air. It's just not true. Unfortunately, like I said, for me, I can't just because of the bad distribution in my engine. So I kind of tend to run my middle cylinders at peak. And so I got to do a little more experimentation, but they say that for guys like me who do that in a 182, if I'm running my middle 2 cylinders at peak, that means these 2 behind me, they're running rich at peak and these 2 are running lean at peak. So they say, they use 182s as a great example for 182 guys are out there running all of it, because there's this whole controversy between should you go rich at peak or lean at peak or peak, and they say, oh, the 182 guys do all 3. So, take a lesson from them. They're fine.
Yeah, what they expect you to do.
Curious, what's the CDT temperature?
The what?
The middle right?
Middle right. At 259, I do not know. CDT. This is where my carb temp is here. Yeah, fuel pressure, CDT. CDT that's running 250. I don't know. Somebody look up November 1151 Mike.
Well, it looks like it's an M20 kilo. That would be a
Mooney. Okay, yeah. With the TI-SIO 360. Wow, there's all kinds of information down there. I should have used mine that way. I already know. He pointed it out. It's a M20K Mooney with the TI-SIO 360. Should just use mine. I know what mine is.
172 Lima.
What? Okay, this
Well,
is
it
all
probably
made up
is
then.
now.
Okay, I'm gonna write some stuff here. Probably. We don't have much time. We'll circle back around this tomorrow. All right. I don't want to get too heavy right now. So that mixture is going to have an effect on EGT and CHT. But okay, let's take a look at this. So this is a chart out of a Continental book that is for a specific manifold pressure and RPM setting. So as you change manifold pressure and RPM, these lines are going to move around on the graph, but they kind of stay in line. So here's the thing. So I added some lines here. So the green line, best economy, blue line should be best power, and red line, peak EGT. The star is max CHT and internal cylinder pressures. So this top line is exhaust gas temperature, which is what we've been talking about. And I said that that number doesn't matter. It's not important, right? Okay. Well, the next one is cylinder head temp. That one is very important. All right, down here is brake horsepower, how much horsepower we're putting, which would be a direct correlation to how much speed you're going to get out of the engine or aircraft. And down here is brake-specific fuel consumption, which is like saying miles per gallon, your economy. So if we look right here at peak EGT, where I'm running two of my cylinders, we're going to note that my cylinder head temp is not too bad. It's low. This is for an IO 550, which I do not have. But in this case, that would still be at 415 degrees. Is that good or bad?
It's pretty hot.
That's pretty freaking hot, if you ask me. Brake horsepower, not bad. Close to the top. Specific fuel consumption, close to the bottom. We want it close to the bottom. All right, but I said that a lot of people do peak and then enriching it by 50 degrees. This says it's fuel flow. Let me think. 50 degrees. Oh, we're right here at 1525. So that would be right here, be 50 degrees on this chart right here. So blue line, best power. I peaked out on my power, brake horsepower, should be right in there. But where am I here?
You're pretty much barely lower. All you're doing is burning more fuel.
Yeah, but I did bring up my, right here, at your max CHT and internal pressures. That's about 25 to 50. In this case, it's from here to here.
That's what I'm saying.
That's 50,
you're
yeah.
just cooking your cylinder heads more
Right here.
and burning more fuel because your power's not that much more.
Yeah, so that's right there. That is 50 degrees rich of peak EGT. So you go to peak EGT and then give it another 50 degrees cooler on your EGT to save your cylinders.
Wait, but it doesn't.
But it doesn't. That's the thing that nobody, I say nobody, so many people don't realize. And so as an engine mechanic, a guy doing cylinders, people bring in engines and, in fact, it wasn't, I was working down at the other day, it was like, oh no, man, this guy's burning up cylinders. He's running too lean. Where's he running? I told him he better go 50 degrees rich of peak. So, okay.
Should have printed out this chart and gave it to him.
See him soon.